Next step, diving into functions. So functions allow you to package your code in separate blocks of code and then reuse that code again, and again, so you don't have to input the same code over and over again. Now, the first thing what we'll do is create a new file. Let's call it functions.ps1. And so we have a nice workbench where we can actually write down the code. So the first function that we'll create is a function called calculateCircle. Now what this function will do is actually it will read from the user the radius, and then based on that we'll actually calculate the surface area and then write it out to the console. So the first step we have to do is make the function, call it calculateCircle, open the angel brackets, and then inside the angel brackets we can define mypi. We can equal it to 3.14 or something more accurate if you like. Next step is actually reading in the radius, and here we can actually reuse code that we made earlier. So we'll start by making a radius and say that it's a float variable. Then we'll do the read host asking what is the radius. Now, once we have the radius, we can actually do the calculation. Okay, surface equals radius, multiply radius, multiply mypi. And let's now write out that surface area. So let's write the surface area of a circle with radius. Radius is surface. Okay, so now let's execute this code and let's try to call our function. So the way we call our function is just using its name, calculate-circle. And by the way, your PowerShell terminal does have auto-completion, so you can just type in calculate and tap and so on. Okay, let's give in a number, let's say 10, and see what the result is. Okay, exactly what we expected. Now, if we want to calculate another circle, we can just call calculate-circle again. So the next thing what we do is we'll add in some comments. Now, why is that important? When you write code, you know exactly how it works. But maybe later you want to reuse that code and it's not so clear what exactly every variable does. What we will do now is add some extra comments to the code. So the first thing what we'll do is a multi-line code. So the way you do that is you take the left pointing bracket, then put in the pound sign, and then you can add a couple of lines of comments and close it off with a pound sign and a right pointing bracket. For a single line of comment, you can just use the pound sign itself. Okay, if we execute this code, it will just execute fine. It won't do anything with the comments itself. Now, our function looks already really nice, but every time we want to run it, we need to be interactive. We need to tell PowerShell what we want. So let's make the function less interactive so that we can reuse it in other functions, for example, without having to ask input from the end user. And the way to do that is actually by giving in a parameter. So we can actually tell the function we are expecting a parameter that is given by us once the function is called. So to do that, let's put some space at the top and let's type in param. Now the param block is where you actually define the incoming variables. So let's define our radius here and let's assign it 10. That doesn't mean that it always has to be 10. That just means that the default value will be 10 if a user doesn't supply us with a radius variable. Now, the next thing what we'll do is instead of writing it out, we'll just use the return statement to return the surface area. And then somebody can do something with it. If they don't do anything with it, it will be just put on the pipeline And of course, because it's the end of the pipeline, PowerShell will execute it. Okay, so let's try it out. Let's run our function and supply it a radius of 15, for example. Okay, great. Now let's go one step further. Let's try to save the result, for example, in another variable. Let's take the surface variable and then equal it to our brand new function and then supply it with the radius we want. Okay, let's try to write out the result. And we can see that the surface area is actually put inside that variable.